How have things been?
Very emotional and crazy on many different levels, obviously. One side of it's crazy and horrible in a war zone always, and when you see the horrors, but then at the same time, it's the emotional side for us going back to the place where we spent 10 days, a few days with them.
Yeah.
So it's a mix, but it was really interesting. But as usual, the situation on the ground is not being reflected in the media coverage.
Really? How would you say what differences?
Well, the media coverage is this is the heroic fight against ISIS and they're beating a terror group. However, the reality is that this is the destruction of a city, bombardment of a city, where probably more than 90% of the people killed are civilians.
Yeah.
There was only 2,000 or 3,000 ISIS fighters there. There's still 2,000 there now.
Yeah. I mean, so that's one thing that we have.
600,000 people are still there. And in order to get 1,000 or 2,000 terrorists out, we're bombarding a place filled with 600,000 people. And that's completely lunatic. And it's especially lunatic when you consider that this is the entire reason for IS being able to come out in the first place.
Do you think that approach is making things worse?
Of course. Well, that everybody on the ground tells us that too. All the people we spoke to, they all said this is going to be the same shit. They said, wait a couple of years, it's going to be the same. They're creating the same situation like before in Mosul. They're going to be suppressed by the Shias. The Shia take the city back. They're going to give them a shit life. They're going to have killed tens of thousands of people once they're finished. And all these people have family members, which can become potential terrorists. And since the situation will not get better here, because the government has no interest in that, it will just create, again, the same situation where people will be angry, there will be protests, people will become more violent, and it will create the breeding ground for a group like ISIS.
So what we're seeing here isn't, the potential end of IS as being built in terms of this assault on Mosul. You're saying that it's going to make that problem escalate.
Yeah, we're trying to solve the problem with the reason of the problem. It doesn't make any sense.
And so could you just tell us a bit more about airstrikes and aerial bombardment? What did you see of that on the ground?
Well, there's parts here in Mosul that are more destroyed than parts in East Aleppo. You see it from the coverage, yeah. But here it's, we're fighting great. We're fighting those evil terrorists. And in Aleppo, it was said, oh no, they're only bombarding the civilians. But here, there's more civilians than in Aleppo. There's less terrorists than you had in Aleppo, but you're bombarding much more. And the bombardments, the bombs that have been thrown on the city, you can probably check with Air Wars or others, there's way more bombs being thrown onto Mosul than there were being thrown on Aleppo by 2,000 terrorists. And then you have to live with those assholes for 2 years. And then in order to free you, they come and bombard your places, your entire city. Completely ridiculous. And they haven't learned anything from the Iraq war. They haven't learned anything from the mistakes they made afterwards. We just don't understand it. Oh, my dad's here.
Wasn't he great? I think his interview would be much better than mine. We've been asked very often if we would go back to the Islamic State. Of course, we said no, not to the Islamic State how it was. But we were always interested what would happen to these terrorists. This was an opportunity to see what they are doing and what we are doing. We saw the rise of ISIS and we saw ISIS falling down. But ISIS falling down as a state with a territory. Because ISIS is not falling down as a terrorist organization. I fear that as a terrorist organization, after this incredible, brutal war, ISIS will be even stronger. A lot of young guys in Ramadi, Fallujah, and in the other cities which have been destroyed will join ISIS because they have lost everything. They have lost their houses, their families, and those ISIS fighters, a high percentage will escape. In Ramadi, 80% escaped. And they regroup. We have now 1,000 fighters, maybe 2,000 fighters, and 50% of them will escape. There are many strategies. There are open parts where they can escape. The money is a big strategy. And these fighters regroup together with young people, who are joining them. And they will go to other parts, maybe to Libya, maybe to the Sinai, or maybe even in Iraq or in Syria. But at the end, even if they are defeated as a state, they will go to the desert. And they told us, when we met them, I asked them, what will you do if you are defeated? They say, no problem. We have been defeated once in 2007. We regrouped, we went to the desert and we regrouped and we will come back. And now they have a new history, a new story, a new narrative. The narrative is they have survived the attack of the strongest nation of the world, of 68 nation coalition, which was bombarding them every day, and they have escaped a thunderstorm of rockets and bombs and sophisticated bombs and so on. And that's a big story. So this is one part. This is a strategy. We saw the Americans bombard, and when everything is destroyed, the special forces go forward and kill ISIS fighters. But what we saw is just a horrible, dirty war. We saw dead ISIS fighters in the street. We saw dead ISIS fighters, 2 dead ISIS fighters in a hospital, killed 2.5 months ago. You know, nobody finds the time to bury them. We have seen heavily injured girls, fathers crying. We've seen mothers crying in Mosul because they took her husband away. They said, you have been working with ISIS and nobody knows. And they were beaten in the street, these people who were suspected to be working with ISIS. So we saw the whole strategy, the whole tragedy of a war. And it's very hard to see these things. We try to go back to the places where we have been, the places that Frederick described in our documentary. We went to the university. We went to the court where a judge told us they would really apply Islamic law, and they didn't. And we went back to hospitals. We went to all the places, or most of all the places where we have been. Everything is destroyed. I know Iraq from the times of Saddam Hussein. I know them from the times of ISIS. But I must say, there's much more misery now, better. And this is also the fault of ISIS, of course.
Yeah.
They have provoked the war, but it's also our fault because our strategy is wrong. And to go to the places where we have been, to see these places destroyed, to meet people recognized us in the streets. In Mosul, they said, we have seen this film. And I said, yes, but people have said it. The film was too positive for ISIS. They said, no, you were the first one. That's the first film was really objective, analyzing ISIS and telling the truth about these criminals. And journalists from Mosul, it was just a great film, because for the first time, yesterday, a journalist told us, living in Mosul, for the first time that I understood what ISIS is. So it was a very, very emotional trip to go back to the places where we risked our life to find out the truth. And I must say, this time it was even more dangerous because ISIS fighters were shooting on us. Snipers tried to shoot at me. I just turned a second before, but somebody with us was a little bit hurt, so it was different. We didn't have a guarantee from the Caliph this time, so they shot at us. But we knew that it was always dangerous. But it was a very, very emotional comeback to the places where we have been a little bit more than 2 years ago.
In your own opinion, what needs to change in terms of the West's approach to Mosul and ISIS now?
ISIS as a state is being destroyed because we destroyed the entire state. But destroying the state means destroying the cities, destroying the villages, killing the people who live in the state. And with that, you don't kill the ideology. The ideology which has the breeding ground in the situation is just being enhanced.
A big point of their ideology is they say, you are unfair with the Muslim world. And now they say, look at that. Look at these houses. You are unfair with the population. And we asked a girl in a refugee camp, if you see the misery of the refugees, this is also something you cannot imagine. The people we met in Mosul, many of them now are in Mosul. And we asked her, are you happy in this poor refugee camp? She said, I would like to stay here forever because I'm not bombarded here. The bombardments are over. And you know, this is something which is like a knife cutting in your heart. And because Germany is a part of this anti-terror coalition which is bombarding Mosul and bombarding little girls like the girl you were talking to.
And you just have to say like this: if we had 2.5 or 3,000 ISIS fighters in London, if then the coalition would decide to bombard London and to bombard hundreds of thousands of people who were in there, you would say this is completely crazy. How can you come up with such shit strategy? Because this is not how you fight terrorists. Like you cannot fight 2,000 terrorists by bombarding a city with hundreds of thousands, up to millions in there. So if our politicians think they're solving the problem with this, they're not. They're taking the state away, but taking the state away means destroying the cities, means creating more plight, and which will be the catalyst for more terrorism.